Welcome to CEO with Sophie. Just a quick note from me. If you like what you hear, go ahead and join the CEO Club right now by hitting that subscribe button. Not only will you never miss an episode, but you'll also be helping us out more than you know. Thank you and enjoy. Today's episode features an extraordinary leader with a powerful vision, Jennifer Jeronimo, the CEO of Gaingels Inc. With over 2 decades of expertise in finance and banking, Jennifer's career spans some of the world's most renowned institutions, including Credit Suisse, Bear Stearns, and JP Morgan, where she rose to the prestigious role of executive director. Since joining Gaingels in 2021, Jennifer has become a tireless advocate for equality and representation in venture capital, working to create lasting change for underrepresented founders and empowering diverse voices in the industry. Under her leadership, Gaingels has supported over 2,500 portfolio companies and has raised $900 million in network investments, an inspiring testament to her impact. Jennifer's remarkable journey also includes launching the Women Achieving Venture Equality program, which has already empowered over 200 women in venture capital. She's an advocate, an athlete, dedicated mother, and a true trailblazer for the next generation of business leaders. Get ready for an inspiring conversation with someone who's truly making a difference. Here's Jennifer Jeronimo. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the CEO with Sophie podcast today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So I had to get you on. We met last year. I'm just going to give everyone a little bit of context. We met last year at a networking event actually for Gaingels, which we'll talk about very soon. I heard your story. Obviously, you were chatting away to a lot of us. And actually, I was like, I have to get her on the podcast. So, yeah, then I kind of just traced after you and now we're here. So, yeah, I'm so happy that you decided to join us.
Well, thank you for having me. The pleasure is all mine, Sophie.
Yes. Awesome. So let's go into a little bit about yourself and your background. Give people a little snapshot view to who you are.
Yep. So, I am the CEO of Gaingels Inc., and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds. I won't talk that long about myself. Prior to joining Gaingels, I really spent most of my career in the banking industry. In the last 19 of which before joining Gaingels, at JP Morgan. I worked in 3 of the 4 lines of businesses. And I really loved working at JP Morgan. I bled blue, and I thought I would never leave. And then somebody called me and asked if I wanted to run Gaingels and if I'd be interested in meeting with the founders. And at first, not knowing that much about the company, I did it more because it'd been a while since I had interviewed. But then when I started to do research about the company, I really started to get excited. And so, Gaingels is, our mission is to show the world that equity of access and representation leads to positive returns. And how we do that, right, is we invest at scale. So, we've deployed over $900 million into over 2,000 companies, over 2,500 companies. So we invest at scale. So that's the scale piece, but with the best. So, we never lead a deal. We co-invest alongside VCs. And we do a lot of great deals with a lot of great VCs. Like we've done over 35 deals with Sequoia and over 75 deals with Greycroft. And there, and General Catalyst and NEA, we've co-invested alongside. And so, and it's through a community that measurably impacts diversity. Now, that just sounds like a big word salad, but what that basically means is over 65% of my members are diverse. 50% of my dollars are diverse. So we are providing our members with access to deals that, they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And so, why that was so, so I didn't mention that I always had a purpose in life, and that purpose is to help women take their seat at the table. And you may ask me, well, what were you doing at JP Morgan then? But I felt like I was living out that purpose by being on promotion panels and being part of the ERGs and acting as a sponsor and mentor. And, I spent a lot of time at JP Morgan, helping promote women. And so I always felt good about that. It always fed my purpose. But to actually do this outside of the four walls of my company was just something that was super exciting to me. And I wanted to be a part of it. So that's why I joined Gaingels. I'm happy to talk about like all the different things we do. But you know,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's perfect. And we will definitely dive into Gaingels because, like I say, it's definitely something that's close to my heart as well, and probably something we connected on because it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're all trying to do here. What I want to touch upon is obviously JP Morgan is a massive company, probably known slightly more for being male dominant. But something that I found interesting is that I think you started there in more of like an admin role and you kind of progressed all the way upwards. Is that right?
yeah.
Or
Well, I started my first job actually it's a little bit of a twisty turny. Um, I worked as an admin at Bear Stearns.
Okay, yeah.
And then Bear Stearns, my boss moved. He went to Credit Suisse. I came with him, worked at Credit Suisse. But I knew I didn't want to be the person that was setting up the agendas and, doing the travel, And back in the day when I was an assistant, like you did personal things as well. Like I would go and deposit money at the bank for him. And he was lovely. I mean, he was really great, but I knew I wanted more out of my career. And so what I would do, was over at Credit Suisse, I would just after 5, I would walk around to the other managers and ask them if they needed any help. And I would say, don't worry, I'm already off the clock. I want to get skills somewhere else in some of the things that you're doing. And one day a senior guy, reached out and he said, well, actually, I noticed he was doing something that took him like a really long time to do. Like there was, he would spend about 2 hours a day, like at a Bloomberg terminal, right? And he would, type in do a bunch of calculations, and then he would charge either the credit or debit balance on their on margin accounts for their clients. Every client had sort of a different fee structure. Some were linked to LIBOR, some were linked to Fed funds. And so I went over to him one day and I had said, I think I can cut that job down to like 15 minutes. And he was like, impossible. Get out of here. And I was like, no, really, I'm going to build a spreadsheet and all you'll have to do is plug in like Fed funds, the LIBOR rate, and it's going to automatically calculate. And, I got do you know how important this is? We can't leave, we're going to make lots of mistakes. And I go, let me build it for you. Then you continue to do it your way, but see if my spreadsheet works. Yeah. And so lo and behold, I ended up saving him like 2 hours of work a day. And he became, what we call a sponsor, right? Mm-hmm. He was in my court. Like he was in my boss's office going, you got to use her for other things. She'll solve your problems. I mean, he really thought I was brilliant. I was just really good at Excel. And I know like I'm aging myself right now with this story. But it was really, that's how it was through him that I got a big break. And then after that, like I finally got out of that admin role. And then I started growing. And then I ended up moving back to Bear Stearns. And then Bear Stearns got taken. And then at Bear Stearns, I really moved up the ranks really, really fast up to managing director. And then we got taken over by JP Morgan. And then that's where I spent the rest of my career until I joined Gaingels.
That's a good story though. And I think that's good for people to see is like you spotted an issue or you spotted a challenge that someone was maybe having and you came up with a solution. So you went with the solution and said, let's do this. And that literally gave you your big break. So I think that's a really good story for anyone, trying to progress their career, is like come up with solutions that are gonna, deliver obviously results, but also something that's gonna save hours is really useful.
To come up with solutions for people in positions of power, right? Like
Oh
he wasn't like the most senior person in our department, right?
yeah.
But he had my boss's ear.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be lying to you if I said I was that intentional. Like I was just asking everybody, but hindsight being 2020, doing it for him was probably the most important piece, because then he was in my boss's office going, don't make her get you coffee. Like get her to help you save time in your day, and like he was a really great advocate. And then my boss ended up being a phenomenal advocate, and he started using me for different things.
And how did you find, because I know we've spoken about when you were at JP Morgan and you were actually really actively involved in getting more women into obviously the business and, pushing women upwards, should we say. Anything from that experience that you feel would be useful to share, or anything you did that you were like, actually, this worked really well when I was, in the corporate world?
So the one thing I will say is a lot of like in the beginning of my career, if I could do something differently, right? And I learned this at JP Morgan, was that your network was really important, right? Um, and so it was really, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. It's not just the people who get promoted aren't always the ones that do, the best work, right? It's the ones that are seen, right? And make themselves visible. And so I tend to sometimes be a person in the background. I like to focus and I never felt like I needed to be like getting my name out there. And it wasn't until like, I think when Bear Stearns got taken over by JP Morgan, and I had great mentors and lots of great people who helped me build my career at Bear Stearns. I went to managing director pretty quickly, and it was on the backs of people, men and, women, who supported me. Right. But at JP Morgan, I'll never forget, we got, Bear Stearns got taken over, and about a month in, I get invited to the women's sponsorship program. And I'm like, what is this? And am I in trouble? And it turns out it was a whole program to help women get to the next level of their career. And some of the things that we learned was, building your network and making sure that the work that you're doing is seen by leadership, going to the networking events and making yourself known. At a meeting, a lot of times, earlier in my career, I would like write a little note and like pass it to my boss, right? But I'll never forget when I was at JP Morgan, one woman was like, just say it, Jen, like say it. Like, we want to hear from you. I don't need you to pass me notes, and so that's some of the stuff that I think I learned. And from other women was making sure that you're also being visible, that you put yourself out there. A lot of times you think, oh, no, they don't want to talk to me, and everybody else wants to talk to them. You know what? People do want to know who you are, and that stuff is helpful. It's not just, a saying to build your network. It really, and as you get more and more senior, the building that network and staying in contact with that network is important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And being visible, I think, is really important. Like making sure people see you. And especially I think nowadays there's a lot of things around brands. Like build your own brands. Yes, you work for a business, but your career is going to last you your lifetime. So make sure you're building your brand and getting yourself out there so people know that you are doing amazing things inside and outside of a business. Although it can be scary, putting yourself out there is scary. And we're not saying that it's not, but once you get going, like then you're just rolling with it and you've got no
Right.
choice to stay out there.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. I think that's a really, really good point. And the network piece as well. And I do agree, like your network, well, whatever career you're in is really useful, especially, in a business such as mine. My network is literally how I do business. It's, a
Gotcha.
matchmaker in putting people together, and it's all about who you know. So yeah, I do think that's really valuable. So
Right.
yeah, I love those points that you've mentioned. I do want to speak about Gaingels, but I want to ask something that's going to lead into Gaingels, because I suppose going from a big company like JP Morgan and obviously the ones from before, how did you find it going from JP Morgan to Gaingels, and what was kind of the biggest challenge that you had?
So I think going from a really big company, where you had lots of people to check in with, and not to sound repetitive, but, you know, JP Morgan is several lines of businesses. And usually there's somebody that is doing what you're doing in another line of business, or you've just got like this plethora of like people that you can tap into. You got like tons of lawyers and compliance people. And like there's this just a homegrown network that you get just by being, at the company. And so when I first got to Gaingels and now I'm running it, I've realized really quickly that, I had nobody to, and, if a problem came up, I'm not going to go to the partners, and I mean, I will escalate it to them, but I have to have a solution in hand first. That's why they hired me to, to be the CEO. You can't talk to your staff because like, you're trying to make a decision. So it was really having to find an external network that I never really, built, outside of JP Morgan, right? I mean, again, JP Morgan was big enough that you could have the best of the best in every, in every sector. And there's always somebody who knows what you're looking for. And it was great, because I had a little bit of that background, so I could go back to my friends at JP. But I was just like, you know what, I've got to start building my network outside, so that I have people to tap into. I also think it's interesting when it's a smaller company, right? You don't expect, it's not as clean cut as to, at a big company, there's a person that fills a role, they have a job description, and that's what they do, right? In, a startup or an early stage company, or, in a smaller company like Angels, right? We ask people to wear many hats, right? We still have roles and responsibilities and policies and procedures. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't run the Wild West, but it's not that I have this huge team when we're trying to do something different that I can just, I'll have to tap somebody who's maybe doing something slightly different and ask them to help out. And so, I mean, that has been, that was a little bit of a shock, and like trying to figure that out. But it also made it a lot more fun. It made it, I get to wear a lot of different hats here at Gaingels. I think my team really enjoys being there because it really does give you a lot of opportunity to grow and to grow faster, right? There's not so many people vying for your position. And so as long as you do a really good job and, you can move quickly. And so, and then the other thing is, culture, right? JP Morgan had, a very specific type of culture. And then you had like almost subcultures, but that were pretty well tied. They do a very good job of tying culture. Coming over to Gaingels, I'm responsible for, as the CEO of the culture, along with the partners and the senior leadership. So it becomes super important to me to make sure that I'm doing all the right things, because like everyone is looking, like the entire company is looking at me. They're looking at how I operate. They're looking at how I lead. And if I want them to lead a certain way, it's up to me. And so, I think it's like super exciting. I loved it and love it. I enjoy JP Morgan. I told you I love Blue. I do like this type of culture. It's a little bit more empowering. I mean, obviously I'm the CEO. I mean, really, can you get any more empowered than that? But, that would be, sort of the difference between a big company and a smaller company. And I'll just leave you with this, but I also learned a lot of really, so like at JP Morgan, you were almost like the CEO of your little department. So
Mm.
I did learn how to be a CEO at JP Morgan. Like I had a budget that I had to hit. I had people that I had to manage and do performance reviews and make sure that like they're working, to the best of their ability. And so I was able to take that little microcosm of like my mini CEO hat over at JP and move it over. I mean, I wasn't ever a CEO of any business unit. I just want to be clear, but I was able to take those skill sets and bring it forward to Gaingels.
Yeah. And let's lead that into Gaingels then. I know we touched upon it briefly earlier, but would love to just hear more around the business and really what you guys are trying to achieve as a business and how it can, I suppose, relate to someone like me or just anyone in their day-to-day life.
So I'll talk about what makes us unique, right?
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of firms that have lots of deal flow, right? Or angel groups that do similar things. But I think there are three uniques that Angels has. The first is its access, right? You know, the global leagues of pitch book came out and we were like number one in the world for, I mean, in the country for deal flow. And so but like, as I mentioned earlier, this is venture back deal flow. These, some of these names we all know, we were in early stages of those big companies like Madison 8 or 8 Sleep. So it's cool to be able to give our membership that type of access to, good venture back deals. But the second part of that is our accessibility. So when you think about it, if you were just going to invest in a angel company, right? So this is not, there's no venture capital firm that's writing a big check. No, angels writing smaller checks, but smaller-ish checks. Like they write, you got to write at least a $25,000 check though to get on a cap table of an angel company, right? And the asset class is a high risk asset class. Like don't let anybody tell you otherwise, right? And so if you don't have a tremendous amount of money to deploy, right, you could be deploying, you know, into two companies and lose it like that, right? What makes us unique is we have what we call an SPV structure, a special purpose vehicle structure, where folks can, we basically pool our members' money together. And that's what goes on to the cap table. So people can invest as little as $1,000 into a venture-backed company. And they can take a budget and divide it by, because venture is a number game. Venture is a numbers game, right? The more deals you're in, are your more shots at goal. Most companies, even venture backed, right? It's not the majority that hit big, right?
Mhm.
And so, what makes us unique is that we're accessible in the point that somebody can take a budget of, let's say 25 grand or 20 grand, and invest 2,000 into 12 companies or 1,000 into 25 companies and build their own mini portfolio and like step into venture. And then I think the third unique is our community. So we have close to 5,000 members now, both accredited investors, and there's some QPs and QCs in there as well. And we do over 70 in-person events a year. That's in person, right? Across the United States. Just 2 weeks ago, I did a Women Love Money event where we brought in a financial advisor, a women's organization, an entrepreneur, the founder of Glowbar, if you
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that company,
yeah.
right? And we were talking to women about why it's important for women to invest and get into and to be more intentional about their money and not just venture, but you know why they should be thinking about getting a financial advisor and what they should be thinking about tax and all that fun stuff. And so, it's great to be able to provide not only great deal access, but to also provide a value of community for our members. Today I launched WAVE, Women Achieving Venture Equality. It's a 6-month educational program that we run free of charge for any of our members to demystify the asset class, right? Because women don't feel comfortable or I should say women don't always feel confident investing in that asset class. So I want to break that barrier and teach them like what is venture, how to create your investor thesis, how you should think about doing diligence at a pre-seed, seed, series A or B. Um, you know, Topics like that, that add value to people's lives, not on top of just giving them deal flow. So those are sort of our three uniques that that I think sets us apart from other groups.
I'm sold. Sign me up.
Sounds great.
Yeah, no, it's good because no one breaks this down for you, right? And that's something that I've been saying for a while, and selfishly why I'm doing, a podcast or something similar is to learn about these things, especially money. A lot of women don't actually invest. And I think it's down to us being, I say, scared or uneducated. I mean, that's definitely my reasons for it. I only got a financial advisor. I mean, this is probably a few years ago, from my director telling me at the time, oh, it probably is worthwhile you having one. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what I was doing. So I think
Right.
it's so important. I know that you're going to be doing a course anyway for those within your community, but what is something, just maybe something that you can give anyone listening around starting out within investing? What's something that someone needs to know or learn, or can someone go and read a book? Or is there any advice you can give someone who's actually interested in finance investing?
Well, investing the big I or venture investing?
You might have to explain what they are and what the differences
So,
are.
and you're right. Thank you. When I say, there's the more traditional ways of investing, right?
Yeah.
There's stocks, equities, right? And, you buy shares of a company
Yeah.
or an index in the stock market and you watch it, grow. And so, I think I think it's really important to speak to a financial advisor. You'd be surprised how little money it takes to, get a financial advisor. And, a lot of people say, I don't have money to save. Oh, listen, I remember when I was younger and I talked to my first financial advisor and she had said to me, Jen, just a few $100s a month. You've got that. You waste more than that in a month. Because that compounds, right? And so, the one thing, I never read any books, and coming from JP Morgan in the banking industry, they do a pretty good job of educating. I mean, when you live that life a little bit, you're around it a lot. So, I kind of learned as I went. But the one thing I would say is people shouldn't be afraid or think that they don't have enough money to save or go to a financial advisor. I would strongly suggest to anyone who has a job to speak to a few, shop around, get comfortable with someone that you're going to share your information with, and to build a plan. The earlier you do it, the better. Although, if you started at 50, you could still start at 50, right? And build that plan with a financial advisor. It's never too late. That would be the one thing that I would say. And then the other thing I would say, especially for women, right, is talk to other women about money and investing. We don't tend to do that as much as our male
Yeah.
colleagues do. And I think that just does us such a disservice. And maybe I'm just too old, and it's I shouldn't say too old, but maybe it's my generation and maybe the younger generation is doing that. But I can tell you, I grew up and talking about money was a little bit rude, asking people about their investor strategy. Or if somebody asks you about your investor strategy, you may not want to share, not because you gatekept, but because you're not an expert and you don't want to give bad advice. But that's how we learn and share. Just put the caveat out there, but talk about it, right? Tell somebody to do their own diligence, but here's what you're doing. I think it's really important for women um to start talking about money and start talking about money early, like college, as soon as you get into the industry, right? Like you get in the habit of talking about money. You'll be surprised what you can learn from the friends around you and your colleagues. And, again, they may not be doing it. They're not gatekeeping. I can promise you that. It's a lot of times people don't share because they just don't want to give bad advice. But if asked, they'd be happy to. And so that would be another piece of advice I'd give.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely talk about it. That's how you're gonna learn, and whether it's you can speak to anyone about it. Don't feel like, oh, I'm just gonna speak to like my female colleagues. Like the guys will know some stuff
Exactly.
about it. I tell you. So yeah, just I'm now more curious. Like I never really asked the questions. Now I'm like, okay, I'm curious about it. Let me ask questions. So I think we just have to. But I
Yeah.
do think you're right around, a lot of people don't necessarily speak about money and it's a little bit taboo and like, oh no, we can't do this, we can't say this, we can't say that. But yeah, I think the more open you are with it, you'll hear ideas that go, oh, I could do that, or that could
Right.
work for me, or I'm just gonna, even if it is, use one of get an ISA, I don't know what it could be, but all these little things that you don't know about unless you're told
Right.
about it. So
Right.
yeah,
And
there's
I
so
would
much
say
out
if
there.
anybody was interested in learning about venture, well, you could join Gaingels and, take our wave course. But when I talk about like full investing, like your full portfolio, I think it's, going an advisor. We're not advisors. We're just
Yeah.
teaching people about the asset class.
Which is just noting that. I'll put that in the bottom of this so everyone's aware. And in terms of the type of companies obviously that you work with, now correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of them have diversity within the companies, right? A lot of them have, female board members or whatever it may be. That's something that you guys actually look for, is it? Or
Well, we don't solely, I mean, the
okay.
first and foremost is, trying to make a return for our
Yeah.
membership, right?
Hmm.
And so we don't solely look just for
Yeah.
diversity on the founding team, but we ask the question, right? Because we know, like all the studies show, diverse companies tend to outperform. And that's one of the things that we're here to prove, right? But what we also do is if we see a company that may not have diversity in its C-suite or in its board, we can help them with that, right? Like we have a board access program where we help as soon as we write that check, we're in our portfolio company's inbox saying, let us help you find a diverse board member. And we do that, relatively free of charge, maybe for later stage, a slight cost if they actually bring in someone, they hire someone. But it's something that's really important to us. And we talk about the topic of not why diversity is important. And it's important from a bottom line perspective, right? Again, diverse companies tend to outperform. I remember one day someone saying to me, if you go to NYU or college and you go to one of their freshmen, big classes where there's like, 500 people in the class and you look out at that classroom, right? What do you see? You don't see a bunch of straight white men, right? You see you see straight white men, absolutely. You also see women, you see people of color, you get the gamut. So if you want the best talent, you have to be looking everywhere, right? And that's that's the point of diversity that we try to make is, looking everywhere, pick based off of merit, right? But just make sure you've got the best talent pool to choose from. And so that's some of the work that we do. But you know, we're really looking for companies that share in that value system. That want to that want to create an inclusive culture, whatever that means for them. In some cases, it's giving back to their local communities, and different things of that nature. Um, but yes, I think we probably have one of the most diverse books out there, just because of our culture of who we are. Um, we do have, I only run for the most part women founder deals. My partners run different ones as well. Some, but, one does AI, another one is more of a generalist. I mean, they run the gamut, but personally for me, I like to do, women founders, because that's part of my thesis.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's so good that you, I suppose, have that. Well, you've got the ability to kind of focus on women founders, and I think there's more and more businesses that are coming up that are founded by women, and hopefully more. Let's get the
Right.
women driving these businesses. So I want to ask you a question. We're gonna just move outside of your work life because I found this really, really, really interesting, and I really want to talk to you about this. So outside of work, you've also had a career in bodybuilding. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was like ranking sixth in the world in the
All
natural
right. Like
amateurs
this
or
title
something.
is so long, it's not even funny.
Yeah.
I was sixth in the world for a natural, like there's different divisions.
Yeah.
So natural, amateur, woman over 40. So like it's, but still it was probably one of the things I'm most proud of. Because it takes a lot of discipline to be a bodybuilder. I was figure. There are different. So for folks that aren't familiar with bodybuilding, there's all these different like sort of classes of bodybuilding. There's like bikini, there's figure, there's actual like bodybuilding where, and the physique looks a little bit different, right? I was figure, right? So it's kind of in between. And I mean, they have so many more. I mean, now I'm forgetting all the different classes they have. But it was something that I started working out, um, and I was really enjoying it. And then I decided to get a trainer, and my trainer was like, you know what, he goes, you a lot, you've built a lot of muscle. He was like, you could actually, he goes, I think you could be a bodybuilder. And I was just like, no. And he was like, yeah. And then I was like, I didn't even know what it was. Like, I thought it was like, I would get on, and like lift things and lift them up and, try to lift the heaviest thing. But what it really is you get on stage and you pose in this, bedazzled bikini. And, basically all the work that you're doing up until the show is really the hard work. And then, I mean, the show is tough too because posing is not easy. People think it looks easy. It's not. And it was just, he said, I think, why don't you give it a shot? And I was like, all right, let's sign up for something. And we signed up and I gave myself like 6 to 8 months to really get into like crazy shape. Uh, I had no idea what I was getting myself into either. Like I ended up having to meet a nutritionist, a posing coach, my trainer, but I ended up um doing my first show in some local high school gym, right? And I loved it. Like it was so much fun. I felt like a kid again. Like that. When was the last time you get on stage? Like as an adult, you don't get on stage anymore, right? I go to my son's, recitals and stuff, but like you don't think you're going to do that anymore.
Mhm.
But like you get to do that. Like you get to have like a day that's about you. That's how I felt. And I really loved it. And I ended up my first show for over 40, natural amateur. I ended up being in the top 5 of my class, which then gets you a ticket to the Worlds, which is like the one at the end of the year, and then I did that, and so technically, right, like the winners are the top 5, and then but then like a week later they gave you like this, who was 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I was really like, I'll never forget when I posted that on Instagram. I was like, I'll take 6. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but, it was when you work in financial for as long as I do, and you have like this sort of group of friends that, you've been growing up with throughout your career. It was a lot of fun to like all of a sudden open myself to this whole new other community of like gym rats and bodybuilders and trainers and it really, I felt like it gave me a little bit more of I wasn't a one trick pony that everything was all in this one bag of what I did for a living, that I had something outside of my job that was just as important that gave me joy.
Do you think it actually helped? Also, firstly, I just say this is big time. This is awesome, like that you did this. So, definitely shout out, props to yourself. But do you think there's anything you learned from the process that actually helped you in your day to day of your job?
Well, at the time, because that was in 2019, right?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was still at JP, right? But I
Mm,
was working up until that point like stupid hours, right? Like you know, 12, 13, 14-hour days. And not that the company made me, but like that was just like that was my
what you did.
entire identity, and like I had to be perfect in it. Not they probably would say you weren't, but you know what but I think what I learned, but when I started really training, right, you have to like, as you get closer and closer to the show, the training gets that much more intense. Like, once a week with a posing coach, you start doing 2-a-days at the gym, right? Once in the morning for cardio, in the afternoon as you're weightlifting. And so all of a sudden I had to learn how to fit my work in a shorter day, right? And I'm not saying I worked an 8-hour day, but like there are days where, I was meeting my trainer and I was leaving at 5:30, which was like unheard of for me, right? I would get in at 7 and I'd leave at like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever it was at the job and, required. And so this really and once you get to like a few months out, like you can't miss, like you really do, as far as the discipline, it almost has to be perfect, right?
Mm,
Like every day, like I didn't drink for 6 months. I would go out to dinner and put chicken in my purse and order lettuce and then throw the chicken on top because I could measure it and I knew what was in it. But like, and then time, like I just had to make the time. And what I learned from that, and I wish I learned it earlier, was I could still really be successful in my job and have this other life. And unfortunately, I learned that lesson in my 40s. But I learned it, right? And I realized, and then what I also realized was the law of diminishing returns. I actually felt like I was even better because when you work a really long day in the office, and I always say this to people, when me writing an email at 7 a.m. will take me 5 minutes. Me trying to write an email at 6 o'clock, just 6 o'clock at night, that'll take me maybe 20, 30 minutes. My brain is not fully there. I'm tired. And the later it gets, the longer that same email takes to write. And so I was doing myself no service of the day in, day out, working these long hours because I just wasn't working efficiently. And I wasn't, and then the other thing was that I also learned is when you really work a long day, you expect to work a long day. I might BS a little bit more at the water cooler whereas once I was like really training for this, like, and I knew like, oh, I'm going to see my trainer at 6:30. So I gotta be, I gotta be out of here in my gym clothes at 6. I made sure don't have time for that right now. Let's just get this done. Jen's got to be out by 6 o'clock. Like the phone's ringing at 5:55. I'm like, I love you, but I got to head out unless the place is burning down. Can we talk about this tomorrow? And like, guess what? 9 out of 10 times be like, no problem. I was just trying to get you at the end of the day. We could talk about it tomorrow. And I didn't realize that some of the habits that I had formed were just not working for me. They weren't making me better. I wasn't any better of a leader. Like that I really needed to, like, this was what I needed to do in order to be better at my job, if that makes any sense.
yeah. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of people, even myself, would be like in your sort of, I suppose, where you were however many years ago in that sort of situation now, just trying to, you know, work as hard as you can. And you think that that equates to working long hours. And it really, really doesn't. You have to be efficient. You know, if you can get your job done in 4 hours, fantastic. Do it in four because then you can enjoy yourself after,
Right.
you know?
I mean, I remember, it's funny, just a little aside on that, right? I remember one day though, and it was right before I started, it was when I was working out and I was trying to like create, try to figure out my life a little bit. And my boss had said to me, Jen, I think you're, now I was always, I'll preface this with, I was always like sort of a top performer, right? I was, in the rankings, I was always towards the top. Everybody knew Jen could get it done. And I would always get more and more, stuff. And one day my boss, turned around to me and said, I really can't give you any more. I think you're hitting your ceiling. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, well, I mean, look at you have like a 200-person team, Jen. But yet you're working like, you know, 12 hours a day. I can't give you anything else. There's not enough hours in the day. And so one of the things which all aligned that helped me get to sort of the body, that was actually one of the tipping points of me getting in shape and like starting to like take care of myself and try to find a little bit more balance. Right. But she was like, Jen, she goes, I love you. I love the work you do. It's really great quality, all that fun stuff, but you can't take on more. You're too busy. There's no more hours in the day to give you. And it was at that point that I was like, I got to figure this out because this is not it. I'll never forget coming home and being like, it is not it. I didn't land here. I am moving. And yeah, I'm too young for this. And that's, it's really important to figure that out so that you can take on more. That's the only way you can grow.
Yeah. Basically, create your boundaries. Do you think it's down to delegation as well? Did you delegate or were you just trying to do everything yourself?
I thought I was super dedicated, at the time. I think now hindsight looking back, I think I was a bit of a control freak and actually not giving my team the opportunity to shine enough. Because once I started learning that, well, then it's really about how you leverage your team, right? And I always used to feel bad about giving my team too much work, right? Extra work. That's why I would take it on myself and I'd be the martyr. But once I started being like, no, I need you to do the first stab at this deck right now. I didn't realize that they were like super excited to get that job. And they were like, all right, great. And like, all I had to do was like sort of guide them on it, And so like, it was like, I started to learn how to really build people to like, I was good at getting people to like a certain level, but I wasn't good at getting them like to that like executive director level. It was then that I started really being able to like shepherd people at like to senior levels of the organization because I was giving them like really, stretch assignments and things that, stretch them a bit, but help them grow.
Yeah. And it's probably such a nice feeling as well when you see people growing and, giving them this opportunity is, a nice thing for you to do and makes you feel good as well.
I have to say, I have so many former managers that worked for me that are like doing such great freaking things. And like, I am so proud every time I see their LinkedIn's and like something cool they're doing. I'm just like, look at that, and like, and I'm glad that I hope at least that I had a part in that.
I love that. So we have a closing tradition on this podcast. And I think many of the answers you've given probably have the answer to this within it. But the closing question that we always ask people is what is one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Well, you're making me pick one. So let me just figure out which of the things. I think it was honestly working. Well, maybe two, because it's a cross between these two, right? One is, the law of diminishing returns, right? And I wish I had learned that so much earlier in my career that like longer hours does not equate to, better work, more dedication, I think that, I mean, I believe in working hard, right? And, and keeping your day full and getting the things that you said to get done. But not doing, really trying to figure out how you can do everything you need to do in a certain time frame, right? So that you can live a more rounded life. And then two is like, building and nurturing the network. I have worked with some really amazing people, especially early in my career, right? There are some, and I didn't do a good enough job, early in, like, staying in touch with them. And that makes me want to sometimes kick myself. Like, if I just stayed in touch with there are some people that are, you would know the names, right? If I said them, and I could have had that relationship if I just kept it up, but I didn't. And when you're the more junior person, in a lot of ways, it's your job to do that, right? And so I just wish I did a little bit of that. I think my career could have moved a little bit faster. And I think it could have gone a little easier because I would have had like those people to go to when I had.
Yeah. And I do think you mentioned around, like, as a junior person, it is almost your responsibility to do it. It is because, and you probably know now, like, you're crazy busy. As much as you want to speak to everyone and, like, keep in touch with everyone, you don't have enough hours in the day, and you're not going to work those crazy hours again. So I do think, i- as someone, especially if you want to stay in touch with people, you have to make the effort. It's the same with friends and everything.
Right.
You have to make the effort, and especially if you do have a little bit more time, then you've got to do that. So, yeah, I think those are some great points.
Yeah. I agree completely.
Yeah, amazing. Well, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was great, and I loved it. And yeah, you might now have someone joining you guys at Gaingels. Who knows? We'll see.
Oh, yay! All righty. Love
Fab.
it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have a great
Cheers.
one.